I have mapped myself in this position, so you're stuck with me until I'm done. And what I'm talking about today is maybe something that's gonna upset a few people, but I got to, which is characters I think should have died in The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. And as is tradition with my weird rant videos, I'm gonna have a little bit of wine. This is Banana Delight, which is, what does it say? What kind of, it's a rosé with blood orange and black cherry. It's very good, one of my favorites. So we're gonna have a little bit of that while I talk about this. Okay, a few housekeeping notes before I start. One, I might move you down a little bit. I don't know if I like where you're at. Okay, let's get into it. Once again, I have notes on a sticky note. And I don't know what order to go with this in. I think I'm gonna go in vaguely chronological order of when they should die. So of course, starting in the Eye of the World, very early in the Eye of the World. I'm gonna insert this at the beginning. I forgot to say that this is full series spoilers, because even if I'm talking about something from early in the series, if I talk about it, then that implies the character doesn't die. There will be timestamps, advance at your own risk. This is going in chronological order, so if you feel like you want to do that, but I would say maybe at your own risk. Okay. I think somebody from Evansfield should have died at Winter Night. I think it's absolutely insane that nobody did. And while I understand why and like the justification they give, I disagree with it. And now I completely understand, like, the Trollocs attacked on a night nobody was home, so nobody got hurt, or nobody got seriously hurt. Sorry, I'm gonna go ahead and mute my phone. But I still think you could establish the stakes a little bit more pretty early on by having somebody die. Now I do want to, I'm gonna pause here and preempt some arguments I'm probably gonna get in the comments, but feel free to make them in the comments anyway. That Wheel of Time isn't that kind of series. It's not supposed to be dark. It's supposed to be like hopeful and stuff. Here's my counter argument to that. You can't have hope without cost. And I think part of hope is that you have to have something you're fighting against. And when you don't think people are, you as a reader, when you don't think anybody's gonna die, it's not that hopeful because it's just a given. And on top of that, I think part of hope comes in that knowing doing good has a cost, and that cost is worth paying. So I do want to talk about that. Like, one, you need to establish the stakes for the readers. The readers have to believe that people are actually threatened to feel established. And the fact that very few people die, especially early on, kind of makes that stakes hard to establish. And then at the end, you need to have a cost to victory. And that's kind of my two arguments for why I think more people in Wheel of Time in general should die. And I think that starts very early with Winter Night, where we have nobody die, or if anybody dies, we're not told about it. And like I said, there's a lot of justifications given for why that happens, but like, you know, Moraine can heal, Nynaeve is unknowingly healing people, the Trollocs attacked at an inopportune time, all of that, but like, people would die. Like, even if they're attacking, like the whole excuse they give is that everybody's out and about, but they're out and about visiting their neighbors. So why, just by happenstance, nobody is at the Cawthon house when they set it on fire? So, in general, I think one or two, I think people should have died in Evansfield. I hope the show gives us some stakes there. But I do have some specific options. What order to do these in? I'm gonna start with Bran Al'Vere. So I think the two that I've always thought of that would be good for this would be Bran Al'Vere or Master Luhan. And specifically because these are characters that have a connection to our character, and yes, we can get on like, ooh, that's basically just fridging them, but whatever. So I think they're interesting to have died because they have an impact on our character specifically. I think Bran would be really, really interesting because you're taking out the village leadership, and it adds even more of a level to Nynaeve's guilt around leaving Emond's Field if she didn't just leave the women's circle without a leader, but left the town without any leader because the mayor had just died, right? So I think that could have been an interesting one, and that could have really followed Nynaeve and plagued her even more than just the whole women's circle thing, because while I understand that guilt, I think that just would have pushed it a little higher. And then of course you have Egwene abandoning her family at the time that her father has just passed away, and like, I'm sure Meryn can run the inn, but they only have daughters, so, you know, you could get into some really interesting stuff with the dynamics of Emond's Field and like what the gender dynamics are as far as like families, because is it a case of like families are joined when they marry? Is it a case of like you get your own house when you married, or is it like a case of like the woman joins the man's family or the man joins the woman's family? So like, we know that Egwene has sisters, 5 sisters, and I think one of them is married, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe 2. I feel like in the Raven's prologue, one of her sisters has just had a kid, but I don't remember. So I think that would be an interesting thing to explore, is that she's the only one left at home. She's leaving her mom all alone. So I think that dynamic could be really interesting to explore. Similar thing going on if you kill off Master Luhan, you're leaving the town without a blacksmith because his apprentice is also running off, you know? And so that makes that decision a little more complicated for Perrin, and it's a little more than just like, I don't know, we don't even really get Perrin or Matt's for that point, really, their decision to leave Emond's Field, but I think it could have been an interesting thing to explore. And then, and this is why I'm on side Luhan between the two of these, I think it has less impacts on the village itself, but I think what somebody mentioned when I like pointed this out in Discord at one point, they're like, ooh, and then Mistress Luhan becomes the blacksmith, and Lady Blacksmith, that's just, it does something for me. So that would be, I think, my choice out of those two, is have Master Luhan die. And of course we get the whole like, ooh, the tragedy of Perrin, his whole family dies later, but like, it's really not that tragic. And so I think you can get, that'd be something for Perrin's story. Or, and now this is dark, and this is, I think, even I think is probably too dark for Wheel of Time, but kind of okay with it, is, sorry, Ewan Finnegar. So, if you don't know, I'm gonna go a little meta on this one. So, if you don't know, Ewan Finnegar was meant to be like the 4th Ta'veren. He was also supposed to leave with them early on, decided not to, so that's why he gets a coin at the beginning as like a nod to that, and also I think later he becomes like a 2nd lieutenant or whatever rank he's given under Perrin, and like there's like little nods Robert Jordan gives to him. Now, this would be really dark, and I think you could either do it in a meta sense where it's just like, as a reader, the knowledge that he was supposed to be one of the Ta'veren and then he dies for their journey to start. You could do it in that way, like it's just kind of a like killing off the 4th guy. Meta-wise, or you could actually even have it be a literal thing where the Dark One, you know, Fane's knowledge hadn't quite narrowed down enough and he was somebody the Trollocs were targeting and they die, or he happens to be at Matt's house and he dies instead of Matt, or, you know, something like that, I think has potential. But again, I think that's a little too dark even for me, so, because he's like 12, but you know, it is an option. But definitely somebody in the Emond's Field dying during the White Cloak attack. Just, I think it's a good plan. I will say here, if you've been following, and go ahead and skip to my next point if you don't want to hear this one, that if you've seen the leak that supposedly Moiraine kills Master Hightower, I'm not opposed to that one either. I think, one, it shows Moiraine doing something that causes somebody's death, which justifies the Emond's Fielders' distrust and dislike of her a lot more, and also, like, the guy was a dick, so... Anyway, going on to the next one. The next one here is not a surprise. If you have talked to me about Wheel of Time for more than about 5 minutes, I've probably brought this up at some point, but, Tom Jerome Merrilin, Master Bard. I do not like Tom. I want to be upfront about that before I get into this. I don't like Tom. I think he's a creepy old man. He gives me the vibes of like, have you ever met a man that's slightly over middle-aged and divorced and likes hitting on 20-year-old girls? That's what Tom makes me think of. And now that's not entirely fair to him, I will admit. But that's the vibe he gives me, and it's part of it is the like way he reacts to Nynaeve and Egwene the first time he meets them. Part of it's the whole thing he had going with Denna. Part of it is the way he just kind of lets Elaine hit on him. It's just, he gives me creepy old man vibes. I don't like it. It gives me middle-aged divorced man vibes. It makes me uncomfortable. Okay, so that's the disclosure going into this one. So like, this might not necessarily be just about a story thing. This is just, I don't like the character. But I think Tom should have stayed dead at Whitebridge. I think he should have died. And I think there is no reason at all for him to have returned. And now you might be saying, what about all those plot things he does later? What plot things? Tom does one thing, literally one concrete thing. And don't give me any of those Matt and Rand father figure nonsense, because they have enough of them. Rand in particular, Matt less so, but I don't think Matt needs him. But Tom does one thing, which I will address later. But one of the few things I think Tom actually does is help rescue Moraine. And honestly, there's no reason it has to be Tom. I'm a big fan of the theories that are like, oh yeah, it should have been Swan. Imagine if Swan had been the one to get that note, and then it's Swan and Matt on an adventure to rescue Moraine. I mean, how much better would that be? How much cooler would that have been? But regardless of that, it could have just been Matt. It could have been any combination of things. It didn't have to be Tom. There's no reason it had to be Tom. Especially because like 90% of what Tom does later is really also done by Julian. You don't need the doubling up of that. Now, I don't like Julian much either, and I wouldn't mind if he died. I just don't have a specific spot where he would. So I think that really, it just would be good. You have that impact that it has on Rand and Matt to like remind them constantly the cost of this, the difficulty, the risk. I just think it would be better. And really, I mean, you could even keep learning about him like through Elaine's perspective and stuff. You can keep learning about who he was and then kind of regret that we didn't, I don't know. I just don't like Tom, and I think he should have stayed dead at Whitebridge. It's nothing more complicated than that. I just don't like him. Who do I have next? Actually, I'm gonna go in a different order than I have in my thing, because I want to keep going. So let's fast forward a lot. Now, people dying in the middle of the series probably should. I don't have anyone in particular that should die for that. I don't know, maybe, I think if anybody random I would want to die in the middle of the series. I think maybe, somebody from the Band of the Red Hand at Hinterstap would have been an interesting person to die, just because then they're not really dead, and I think there's some interesting stuff to explore there. I feel like Aiel should have died more often. I think I'm going to talk briefly about Gowan, and I'm not going to get totally into it because you can watch my whole video on him if you haven't already. I think it's like our most popular video because, I don't know, the quality on that video is trash, but I had some points. But him dying at Demise Wells would not be a bad plan. If they wanted to do that, I'm not opposed to it because then he still gets his little fling with more Egwene. Anyway. Anybody else? I think I've heard people say Lyanna dying in the coup might be used. She doesn't really do that much later. Now, I like her, so that I wouldn't love that, but like I get it. She doesn't really do much, so having that be a solid thing. Except she doesn't really have much of a character until then, so it's kind of, would it even be that much of an impact? And I really do like her interactions with Egwene while they're imprisoned in the tower. Anybody specific? I'm trying to think in that like book like 2 to 6 gap because not a lot happens. They killed Julian in the taking of the Stone of Tyr. I would not be opposed. I mean, at that point he's not much of a character, but I think that would be the one place where it would make sense for him to die, is while rescuing Egwene and the girls. Yeah, there's just not a lot of characters I can think of to kill off that early because it's before we get a lot of a big enough cast to really be able to afford it, and all the characters that we have that we follow are important. Maybe Morghese, I've heard that suggested, is that Morghese doesn't need to have her arc, and maybe for the TV show I could see that. There's some grass. Maybe for the TV show I could see that, but not for the books, because I really do like her arc, and in books you can play with having a larger cast of characters, so I don't really see the point of killing her off, but I could see doing it in the show. Especially because if it's during the rescue attempt, so Morgase is actually killed when Rand is trying to rescue her from Robin, and so that maybe even it's unclear to the audience whether or not Rand killed her, so that those rumors kind of have more substantiation to them. Like, maybe not that Rand directly killed her, but maybe she was killed in like collateral damage because of like the palace collapsing and stuff. Maybe I could maybe get behind. But I really do, in the books, love her arc so much that I would not want to do that to Monas can go anyway. Yeah, I can't really think of in that section anybody to die, and then we do have a lot of people in the second half of the series that die, so there isn't anyone specific I think I would do in that stretch. I really wish we could get it, but I do think, other than setting the stakes in the first book, there really isn't that much need to have a lot of people dying in those middle books, because that does become Game of Thrones, ooh, we're just killing people because we can, you know? Alright, so, jumping from there, Tower of Midnight. Matt, Tom, it's not Tom, Tom's dead now, and Noel are going to rescue Moraine. This is going to really upset a lot of people. But yeah. I think they should get there too late. And that they go on this quest and Moraine's already dead. Now, there's a few reasons I think this. One, I think Moraine doesn't really need to survive the series. I think there's something symbolic about her journey being done. And I'll talk about this with Lan in a second. I think there's something to be said for her journey being done and her story being finished, and so she dies. And obviously, like, there's definitely this trope that, like, the only way your story, you know, at the end of your story, you either die or you're married with kids, right? Like, that's definitely a thing that happens in fiction. And I don't want to say that that's, like, her story's done, so she dies, but I just don't see her being satisfied anyway, so, like, and on top of it, she doesn't do anything in the last book, and don't give me, like, she was basically just a battery for Rand, which, like, I think Nynaeve was useful in that. I think it was interesting to see Nynaeve do that because she ends up doing things while there. Moraine doesn't do anything. Should have been, what's her name? The Shan Chan, freed Damane, really old lady. Starts with an A, and I know it's not Alana or Alviren, and those are the only names coming to mind, but you know who I'm talking about. She should have been there. Oh no, my battery's gonna die. Alright, the timing of that worked out really well actually, because just as I hit the stop recording button, my alarm went off for my one class, and then I just charged my phone until my next alarm went off, and it worked out great. So we were talking about Moraine. I did look it up so that I could talk about it. It's Olivia. Not Olivia, like, oh, Olivia. I think she would make more sense to be with Rand in the tavern anyway. She's way more powerful than Moraine, especially at that point. Anyway, so I don't think Moraine really has any purpose in the last book. I also don't think, I dripped on myself. I also don't think her whole showing up and telling Egwene and Rand just get along really does that much. I actually think it would be a more interesting dynamic if that was Nynaeve that did that, because she was kind of a mother figure to both of them at one point. And also because she's kind of at that divide where she has been advocating for Rand to Egwene the whole time. So I really think she would be a more interesting character to have to do that. I just don't think Moraine does anything at the end. So I don't think she needs to be there. So I think it'd be a really interesting and kind of heartbreaking kind of moment to have, that here's this hope, right? Here's a character that we saw die, and most people that read it don't believe she died. And so they're all talking about it, and, you know, and then you get that moment where it's like, haha, she not died, you can rescue her, and then to have that fail. I don't know, something about that I mean, I guess that this is the one death that goes against that whole Wheel of Time is supposed to be hopeful, because that's not hopeful, that's horrifying. But especially if, you know, we go through like Matt giving up his eye for her, but maybe there's something else she left behind, maybe something she asked for from the Finn that they get in that process, so that they still get something, and that Moraine sacrificed herself for something. Because here's the other thing, I like Lanfear. I know I'm one of the few people that do. I think she has a lot of potential as a character and was kind of wasted. I think actually have Moiraine kill her too. I guess that would be a death I would add in. Lanfear doesn't really do anything in the last couple books either, so there really isn't any point to her coming back other than to undo what Moiraine did. So I think having that be one of the things is that she actually did kill Lanfear, and then, yeah, have something else, some tool she asked for that ends up being helpful. Maybe it is a an Angreal or Sangreal that Nynaeve or Olivia can use. Maybe it's something, some other tools. Maybe it's something to remind Rant. I don't know. Whatever it is, I think that would be more interesting to me, because that's all Moiraine is at the end, is just like a, hey, get along you two, I'm a battery for Rant. And I don't think that's really worth anything. It's not worth bringing her back. And similar to that, so one of the things I mentioned with Moiraine, is that her journey is ended, right? She's found the dragon reborn. She has trained him well, you know, you will do well. Similar, Lan's at the end of his story, so he gets to the point where he has resurrected Malkiar. He has accepted the aid of people. He's resurrected Malkiar, theoretically. Now, here's where I will kind of put a little asterisk on here, is I know a lot of people want Lan to have his happy ending with Nynaeve and that they refound Malkiar together. Here's the thing. Lan died. Y'all, Lan died. I will not let the books gaslight me like this. Lan died. Alright. Here's the thing. You have in the last battle is Lan goes and fights Dimidred. And he has this fantastic moment where he uses sheathing the sword and he's like, ha ha ha, I didn't come here to kill you. I didn't come here to win. I came here to kill you. Right? Super awesome moment. Completely and totally undercut by the fact that he's not actually dead. Right? I'm so mad that there's this suicidal move in the Wheel of Time that is entirely meant to be a last-ditch effort when you know there's no other way for you to win. So you sacrifice yourself and die in the process in order to take out somebody that's worth taking out that much, that we see used twice, and the people don't die from it both times. Like, you've got to be kidding me. So, fine. Now, there are those that say Lan died in that moment. There's two interpretations of this scene. Lan's dead, and Rand told that man still fights, which is also a fantastic speech. Resurrected Lan? I don't like this interpretation at all, because gross. Rand is not God. Rand should not be God. Gross. So, I don't like that one. So the other alternative is that he just straight up didn't get killed in that moment, which again, you can't have two people use this end of life, stabbed in the chest move and not die. So I think Lan should have died there. Stayed dead, whichever way you want to interpret it. And now here's that little bit of hope. And again, I'm not a big fan of everybody in this series ending up knocked up. I think one of the problems Robert Jordan had was pairing off all of his characters. And especially with the number that we had foreshadowed, we're supposed to have kids. And for the record, it was going to be worse because Egwene was supposed to be knocked up and live. But I would have Nynaeve pregnant at the end of this as like a little bit of hope for that, like Malkiar will continue. And there's all the soldiers that Lan recruited at the end could help teach her about Malkiar's culture and teach her child's son, daughter about Malkiar's culture and revive Malkiar that way. Because I do think it would be sad to not have that. But it's fine, it's gonna be sad either way. It's fine. Because it's okay for people to die and it's the last battle, guys, all right? Last battle. It is like the end. Have some characters die. And characters we care about, and I'm not gonna get into it about, ooh, but we cared about Swan, and yes, I love Swan. Or, you know, whatever. The only death that has like significant impact on people, from what I understand, is Egwene. And I have problems with how that was handled too. For the record, the fact that the only character in the Wheel of Time that gets like an after-death, like funeral mourning scene is Rand. But, well, from the last battle. I mean, I know we got some with like Moiraine and that bugs me so much, because more than the character's actual death, I matter how it impacts the other characters, and the fact that like Egwene died and the only thing we get to that is little asterisks about the Aes Sedai electing a new Amyrlin, and Swan and Gareth died and nobody cared, and I just... problems. Alright, but speaking of the last battle, I would actually have a few more deaths here. Now, here's the thing. I'll come back to this at the end, but at the end I'll talk about like these are the minimum I would have. These are some extras I would tack on for the last battle. There is a part of me, and this is the very cruel side of me, that I do not think is Wheel of Time appropriate, but something about having all of the Emond's Fielders except Nynaeve die just feels terrible in the right way. Like, the idea that Perrin and Mat die, and Nynaeve wasn't there to protect them because she was trying to protect Rand, but then Rand dies too because there was nothing she could do to prevent it. And Lan, just, God, that's mean and I love it. But I would not actually do that. I do think Perrin dying could be an interesting one. Perrin or Faile. Yeah, Perrin or Faile. The only reason I don't like the idea of Faile dying is because, alright, I've talked about this, and maybe I will do an entirely different Perrin and Faile video, similar to my Gawain one, about like, here's how you can fix this and make this arc slightly better, because it really wouldn't take much. But a quick preview of that is, I think like having the whole Shido kidnapping plot be more about Perrin learning his independence from Faile, and learning how to let her go and do her own thing while he relies on other people, Tam and Barrowlane, if they want to get rid of the gross stuff involved with that, like him leaning on Barrowlane and Tam and Loyal and, who's not with him right then, but Elias. Like, him learning how to have support outside of his partner. I would really like that, right? And so that's where I kind of get into my one problem with Faile dying, is because then it becomes like, it feels like that's a consequence of him letting her go. Like at the end, there's this really great moment where she's like, I gotta go do this. And he's like, you go do that. You do you, babe. And I would hate to see her die because of that. And obviously she's not dying because of that, right? But thematically, that's what it feels like, is that as a direct consequence of him letting her do her own thing, of him letting her support herself, do her, you know, she ends up dying. I wouldn't want that. Perrin dying, on the other hand, especially because they could do a really good thing of, ooh, that'd be cute, as like having Perrin die, and then having like something weird happen where like, because the wolves show up at the last battle, and having like a she-wolf give birth to a pup that maybe like Faile takes care of, you know, something along the lines of that. I don't know what I'm doing here, but I think it'd be like a nice little circle thing of like the implication that that was Perrin reborn, although questions of like, man, wolf, whatever. But I think, I don't know, I think Perrin dying just for some reason makes sense to me. I think it really solves a lot of the issues that Elaine was having at the end because of that. Yeah, so I think it also kind of feels like that sentencing for him having killed White Cloaks actually feels like a sentencing because he died in the last battle. I don't know exactly thematically where I would have him die. I think he should still be Slayer, but then after that, I'm kind of fuzzy. I know he has that whole thing with Lanfear. Yeah, I don't know exactly what I would have, how I would have him die. Maybe it's at the end when he's searching for Faile. Ooh, that would be rough, because then you think everything's over and it's like the calm, and then to have something happen that he dies. Or it could even be as a consequence of that, is that like rearranging things a little, it's not the end of the last battle, but he like abandons what he's supposed to do to go seek out Faile because he panics about something, like, I don't know, whatever. He sees, you know, Faile had taken Bella to ride off, and then he sees Bella riding up with Ulver and the Horn, but there's no Faile, you know, that kind of moment. And so he freaks out and goes after her, and then he dies as a consequence because he fell back on dropping his responsibilities for her. That might be an interesting way to do it. I don't know exactly thematically how to have him die. I just think Perrin should have died. And I don't know why. I don't have any strong feelings for this. And I also realized that I'm killing off a lot more guys than girls. Let me think. Let me give it a quick thought here if there's any women I would kill off other than Moiraine. I have another character I'm going to talk to at the end. But, no. It is interesting because there are a lot more women characters than men characters, but it feels like the women are more... they're either less important to the point of being like so small that their death would not have an impact. They do die, Swan, Egwene, or I don't see a way to kill them off in a way that would make sense. So like Avienda or Min or Elaine, like I would love to skip. I would love if I could figure out a way to kill one of those, but none of it makes sense, honestly. Unless you actually have plans to kill Min. Nah. Anyway, last one here that I'm going to talk about is just kind of an assorted one, which is I think Cadsuane should have died. I don't know when or how, because quite frankly, I don't remember what she does in the last battle. Or before them, but Cadsuane dying, maybe even Rand killing Cadsuane, could be an interesting symbolic element of this is the end of the old style of Aes Sedai. You know what? Cadsuane kind of represents what the Aes Sedai used to be, and I think killing her would make a lot of sense because that's gone. And she definitely shouldn't become Amyrlin Seat because that's stupid. It should have been Sienna, the white Aja Black Aja Hunter should have been the one to become Amyrlin Seat. Anyway, that's kind of my assorted list. If I had to narrow this down to like, these are the ones I think should like, if I were to like pitch this as like, let me change the changes for the TV show, the 3 I would keep is Tom, Lan, someone from Emond's Field, quite frankly. Then after that would be Moiraine, and then probably Cadsuane, then Perry. But yeah, I think that's kind of it. I feel like I had more in my mind at some point, but when I tried to make notes, I couldn't think of any. But maybe there will be a part 2 to this. I want to reread the series at some point, so maybe I'll like make notes of like so-and-so should have died here. The big ones though, that are like, if I'm thinking of little things, like I said, somebody from the band dying in Hinderstrap should have been cool, could have been cool. There's a part of me that kind of wishes Tuon had died, although I think she's more interesting to keep alive because that's some interesting stuff to explore. Yeah, I don't know, maybe Elaine, but I feel like that causes more chaos. It's not really worth it. I don't really see the impact of Min dying. I feel like Avienda not dying but being crippled actually is a more satisfying ending for her. Yeah, leave your suggestions below. If there's anybody you think should have died in the series that didn't, please let me know below. There's definitely characters I think I want to die just because I don't like them. Talonvor is one of them. I hate Talonvor. I think if you really wanted to like have an emotional impact death, it's actually like minor impact on the story. Basil Gill or Bail Doman, I think would be really interesting characters to kill off just for the emotional impact without really any impact on anything else. Yeah, I don't really know how to edit these videos because it's just me talking. But yeah, that would be my suggestion for, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 characters I think should have died in the Wheel of Time and didn't. And yeah, so let me know in the comments below if there's any characters in the Wheel of Time you think should have died that didn't. This is gonna be full spoilers in the comments. 1, because this video is full spoilers. Did I say that at the beginning? Because, yeah, so feel free to say in the comments who you think should die. Go ahead, argue with me. I know some of you are gonna sit there and be like, well, Tom does this thing that's important, or Moiraine, I liked her coming back. I did not. I hate resurrections. I also, all right, real talk. What does Avienda do after book 5? Just asking. That whole balefire bring everybody back. I'm just not a big fan of resurrections, all right? Anyway, I don't think anybody is. Oh, and on that note, Rand should have stayed dead. He should have actually been dead because what good does it do anyone to bring him back? All right, bye.